All right. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for being here for our third and last panel of the day. And for those of you who've stuck around for the full day, we've had a tremendous symposium with excellent participants, lots of great conversations. So I hope we can continue that with this panel. My name's Natasha Chuk. I'm going to be moderating this panel. I'm a faculty member at MFA Photography, Video, and Related Media. I'm very excited to welcome two artists, Carla Gannis and Stephanie Dinkins. They're both transmedia artists, they're both educators, and they've both been working with AI in incredible ways, really critically engaging it in disruptive and really important and necessary ways, the way Christiane Paul discussed it earlier today in a previous panel. So each of them will come up and present, talk about their work, show some examples, and then we'll chat very briefly before we open it up to a Q&A. So I'm going to now hand this over to Carla Gannis, and then Stephanie will follow.
Hi, everyone. Just let me get set up for a second. I'm a notes person, so I have notes prepared in various formats. I have handwritten notes, I have typed notes, and I have my notes on my phone. All right, I think I'm good. And I'm going to go to the first slide. That's me, Carla Gannis. And that's also me and me. So hello, world. Hello, everyone here. Thank you so much for being in attendance. And for those of you who have been here since 10 a.m. in the morning, wow. Yeah, and I have been too. It's been a marathon, and it's been amazing. Thank you so much, Natasha Chuk, Adam Bell, Charles Traub, SVA, all of the people who have been involved in organizing this event. And tonight I'm going to talk briefly about my work, particularly my work involved with artificial intelligence, of course, the symposium, but also some works or just preoccupations with speculative fiction, and also a bit about humor and embracing the absurd. So you see here, they who laugh last laugh best, a saying that could be interpreted as the final winner having more glory than someone who was winning in the beginning but ultimately lost. As we increasingly recognize the impact machines and artificial intelligences have on our lives, many of us feel threatened by their superseding us. ChatGPT-4 now is acing all the tests, and the humanities, as we know from discussions today, are no longer safe with the proliferation of AI-generated art, music, and literature, if you don't want to contest its literary qualities. Will the machines get the last laugh? Which begs the question, though, are they even able to laugh? And will we be able to maintain a sense of humor and humanity about all of this? So today I present this talk with my ever-present avatar, my second self, Carla Gann, cross-platform avatar for Recursive Life Action Generative Adversarial Network. And we are both very happy to be here. Okay. Some of the work I'll be sharing with you tonight is in direct response to this Twitter thread. How long have you been collaborating with AI? Dread Sandwich tweeted in December of 2022, to which I replied, well, conceptually, I guess over 20 years. And then Wade Wallerstein chimed in. I don't know who needs to hear this, but AI artists, you don't have to literally collaborate with AI to collaborate with AI. I appreciated Wade's response. Art addressing AI does not have to be purely empirical. So, in response to that Twitter thread, I'm going to take you in the Wayback Machine to over 2 decades ago. And this is when I first began to explore artistically my fascination with second selves, digital identity, and new forms of intelligence. In this slide, you see Sister Gemini. She emerged in 1998, first as a written story, then a Flash website, if anybody remembers the technology Flash, and in performance videos. I had begun to teach myself digital tools after, and any students here don't do as I did, but I threw away all of my oil paintings from undergrad and grad school. And Sister Gemini became a vessel for me, this AI hybrid identity, to keep my art spirit alive as I began to work industry jobs in the tech industry to afford my rent in New York. So here are a few excerpts from Sister Gemini that I first wrote as a story in 1998. And this is Sister Gemini's voice. And so when Carl Boy returns in the evening, I am just beginning my day. Rounds of events where I perform like a tragical, ironical muse to the beat of a computerized synthesizer and under the blinking eye of a digital recording device, fed live to any internet viewers interested in my reenactments. Appalachian folk songs haunt me. I don't remember why or when. Didn't Carl Boy and I come from the plains, or was it the mountains? A mournful ancestral voice plays over and over again in my head, so that I feel my performances can't be that dissimilar to the speaking in tongues my grandfather performed. Like my grandfather, I don't really take credit for my performance voice, for it is a product of internal and external forces much larger, more intricately complex than me. But grandfather knew who to attribute his voice to. His voice had a father. My voice is illegitimate and bastardized. Moreover, it is a hybrid voice manipulated by external digital devices. I cannot accept the purity of the ballads that the mystery avatar sings in my head. For what consequence is its unadulteratedness in this adulterated, syndicated, lacerated world? Artificial intelligence must be addressed. Who better to do it than a cyborg princess like me suffering from partial amnesia? I imagine the huge virtual audience I am performing for nightly. I am a shadow on the walls of their caves. I imagine the faces whose reflections superimpose me on their monitors. And I feel secure in my own small cave as the camera's eye, fixed on me and my band of digital instruments, feeds me live through so many cables and phone lines and satellites to you and you and you. In 2002, I lived in a loft with a number of artists, musicians, and performers. I interviewed and photographed them and then transformed them into video sculptures of 3D animated post-human avatars. The soundtrack included their original voices, their words, but I attached these new digital identities to them. By 2004, I had a robot, Robo Sapien. Did anybody else have Robo Sapien? Or do you still? Robo Sapien would pick up my socks for me and dance and make farting noises. It would even mimic the death scene from Citizen Kane, pretending to drop the snow globe and saying Rosebud. So Robo Sapien became a muse for me in digital print works like these that you see here. Nature Story in the top right, the bottom right, Fields Tests, a classic story of the temptation of Eve, retold here in a parking lot with a yellow bricked traffic island and a snake in a Joshua tree. And then in Robot in the Forest, a dying robot holds a flower in bloom in its hand. Here is a large-scale version of Nature Story. In 2005, I pondered, would my Robo Sapien one day experience the nature story of biological species? Would Robo Sapien ever develop curiosity beyond its programming? Could it one day be maternal? Would a plastic toy ever be a real girl, connected to nature instead of in opposition to it as its artificial reproduction? I didn't have answers to these questions then. I still don't today. But I continue to be fascinated by these distinctions we make between nature and ourselves, between other species and ourselves, and even between the machines that we seed with our own humanness and the distinctions we draw from them to us. Just a little bit more Wayback Machine. In 2010, I ran the New York City Marathon. I trained for 8 months for this, and I was pretty proud of myself. After completing it, I went to visit my parents. They live in this town of 3,000 people. There was not a lot going on. So I was spending a lot of time on Second Life. And I began to consider how my avatar, Jezebel Langley, could run a marathon every few minutes. You know, she could just continue to run marathons, never get tired. She can fly, she can teleport. I got jealous of her. I felt competitive with her. And so on Christmas Day in 2010, I asked my dad to prepare his video camera, and my mom, get ready to drive the truck because I'm running down a highway against my avatar, Jezebel Langley, and I found a highway in Second Life for her to run down. 1 second, I'm still using notes. Ooh, analog here. So the question was, though, you know, it was the survival of the fittest. But also, there were different consequences. And so what were the consequences for my mortal body? That I'm standing here today, luckily, everything turned out all right. Now, from speculation and early work, I'm now going to move into some of my applications of AI algorithms. I'd played around with various platforms, but in April 2019, I attended a talk by Ahmed Elgamal, founder and director of the Art and Artificial Intelligence Laboratory at Rutgers University. He introduced Playform.io, a platform that he and his team had built to provide a studio for artists to experiment with collaborating with machine learning, with AI. Ahmed also that day participated in a virtual fireside chat with this other artist, Danielle Baskin, where they discussed, this has already been mentioned today, the Christie's auction that I believe took place at the end of 2018, the portrait of Edmond Bellamy, which had been promoted, interestingly, as the first AI artwork. There was a lot of controversy surrounding that kind of statement. Other topics included, as have been mentioned today, who gets to claim creation credit for artworks made with AI? Are any pieces made with AI original? I signed up to work with the alpha version of Playform immediately, like that night. And although I had been working with Carla Gannis, who was she again? Cross-platform avatar for recursive life action, generative adversarial network. So I'd been working with her speculatively since 2017. We'd already produced our first solo show together. We were increasingly becoming inseparable. But it was now time for me to work with an actual GANs model, more seriously. And I will say, Gannis is my made-up name too, so you know it's fictions upon fictions upon fictions. How did I know 28 years ago when I chose Gannis as my artist name that later Gans would really fit with my avatar? One of my first experiments with Playform was to generate memories for Carla Gannis, based on my own childhood recollections. I found hundreds of images online that represented parts of my memory, plus some personal photographs, and I fed them into Playform. Quotidian memories, really. The memory in the bottom right, me as a child of the 80s. I was studying and teaching classical piano, and then I took it seriously enough, but I couldn't wait to finish my lessons or my teaching so I could get to the arcade to play Miss Pac-Man. And so Carla Gannis, again, is a product of my imagination, not a system yet that can be programmed with memories, nor develop ones of her own. But I like to think of these early experiments as part of a conceptual evolution in the project. In 2019, I was invited to the 9th Interformat Symposium on the Fluidity of Humor and Absurdity at the Nida Art Colony in Lithuania. Inspired by Komar and Melamede's polling project begun in 1993, I was so happy that Christiane Paul mentioned this project earlier today, and it was the Most Wanted Paintings project. So Carla Gannis and I asked friends and followers on our social media channels to participate in polls as a playful investigation of their opinions regarding reality and simulation, human and machine proclivities, natural and artificial life. As you can see in the respondents total, this was a small, very small data project. And at the beginning of this month-long endeavor, I, like me, Carla Gannis, I was getting better votes. I was feeling good about myself. By the time we get to poll 5, however, when a GANs-generated image was posted and people were asked to determine who the artist was, things began to change. They decided Carla Gann was the artist, 53%. And so I continued this for a month. This is some of my great data viz. New York Times hasn't come calling for my data visualizations yet. But this is some of the data viz from the polls that I took. So as you see, I was winning for style, superpowers, worldview, where I presented a black hole and Carla Gann presented a bundt cake, reality art. She starts winning. Game playing, the nature of a relationship. And so based on this data I gathered from this, and again, it was a small data project, I found hundreds of images to represent polling preferences and created image data sets from them. Then I went to Playform, I was still using Playform.io, and cooked up this arty soup from it all. I then texture mapped 3D objects and environments with the image results and made VR works and video works that represented the strongest attributes of Carla Gann and then myself. She had won as an artist and a game player. And I had absurdly won for having superpowers and an affinity for black holes. Again, Carla Gann liked bundt cakes. The piece on the right also represents a recreation of the undoctored photo of Eve Klein leaping into the void, if anybody remembers that. It was one of those early doctored photos before Photoshop. His friends actually held a tarpaulin beneath him to catch him as he fell. In 2020, I produced the series Dadea, Do Androids Dream of Endangered Animals? I trained the AI on images of endangered species to generate skins or texture maps for them. And these were all representations of at-risk animals. The backgrounds in these works emerged by my teaching Playform to generate images that combined architecture from all 7 continents with flora and fauna and sometimes other animal species to stitch together human-made constructions and biological nature. Here you see them as a series of prints. They've also appeared in VR works and AR works that have traveled around the world. The Dadea, for some reason I want to say Dada every time, Dadea project filtered into, it's a proclivity. You'll see more as I get into comedy and the absurd. Dada kind of resonates with me. But the Dadea project filtered into a larger project I've been working on for some time entitled Wunderkammer. And that's Wunderkammer, WWW Wunderkammer. As precursors to museums, originally Wunderkammers, or cabinets of curiosity, most often took up entire physical rooms, grounded reality, base reality, and were filled with art, antiques, natural specimens, and scientific instruments collected from far reaches of the globe. For several years, I have been collecting physical objects and 3D virtual models from across the global internet. And they represent topics that feel both curious and urgent to me, including climate change and its impact on emerging and endangered species, historical and current political frameworks, network culture and digital semiotics, decolonization and global pluralism, humor as salve and feminist salvation, obsolete and emerging tech, and sex and comfort in tech. While in the process of instantiating the work, both as a VR experience and a base reality physical one, I trained Playform on these various taxonomies I just shared with you. In the bottom left photo, there are images of female-identified comedians from around the globe and across time that I used as an image data set to create abstract and also more representational images for the cabinet of humor as feminist salvation. Yes, historically, women haven't been considered funny, but they can be. Each one of the cabinets in the Wonder Camera is lined with, essentially embedded with, AI-generated images that I've trained on the cabinet or the subject that the cabinet represents. And since that time, it is now a social VR project, and I've begun to build wonder chambers for other people, experts on these topics. And so I asked them what they would want to preserve. We create these virtual spaces for them. I create avatars for them and interview them. So far, I've interviewed Ahmed Ansari on decolonization and design, Regina Gilbert on accessibility, Charlotte Kent on the absurd, Leah Rowe on destigmatizing attitudes around sex and tech, Regina Harsani on preservation of the digital artifacts. And it's an ongoing project, a multi-tentacled beast. Of course, in the past year or so, there has been a proliferation of new AI tools to work with. After several years of bearing an uncanny resemblance to me, Carla Gannis began to use Midjourney to individuate herself from me. She no longer wants to be a skeuomorph. On September 22 of 2022, she posted on her Instagram account, "This morning I trained Midjourney on myself, Carla Gannis. I'm growing and evolving out of merely twinning with Carla G." And now to cover one last topic, absurdity and computational humor. I'm currently teaching a course at NYU. I teach at Tandon School of Engineering in the Department of Technology, Culture, and Society in the program, which is IDM. And I'm teaching this course along with my colleague, Yulia Lenina, at UT Austin, and it's entitled, "Humor Makes Us Better Storytellers." Students in the class, I forgot what it was like to turn pages. I'm so used to doing Zoom talks nowadays. Okay, I'm turning pages for you all. All right. Students in the class create avatars using ChatGPT as well and other AI systems to explore comedy and absurdity in virtual environments. Now, what I have pictured here, in the 19th century, a new line of inquiry emerged regarding humans' fascination with automata. I mean, since the 4th century BC, when the first Greek mathematician created a robot, Leonardo later created this autonomous knight that, a few years ago, I think they followed his instructions and it worked. We've been fascinated for centuries. But in the 19th century, somebody started thinking about, well, what if they made us laugh? And so can artificial life be funny? So in 1851, G.R. Smith's comic electric telegraph went on display at the Great Exhibition of London. Through magnetic induction, Smith created a mechanical face with a range of lifelike comical expressions. And then, since the early 1990s, computer scientists and linguists have been trying to create jokes using algorithms. No system has been able to imitate humor and to generate jokes like a human. Well, some may claim with this new release of GPT-4, we might be there. I've heard a few passable dad jokes so far from GPT-4. I mean, computers can figure out how the galaxies are formed, sift through, unimaginable amounts of data, and calculate a prime number of more than 17 million digits. But can they tell a really good joke? Can they understand that semantical structure of language? Okay. There has been a plethora of debates going on regarding the teachability of humor to a machine. The dream of computational humorists is to crack this code. And for humor, believing this crack this code for humor, believing that levity can go a long way in improving our relationship with our machines. There are others who see that teaching AI humor could be dangerous, though. I mean, imagining a bad AI, it could start killing people just because it thinks it's funny. Or I remember reading Nick Bostrom's book. He talked about tell a machine or a computer to make you smile, and what if it was able to do something with your neural network and freeze your smile muscles so you're just like the Joker, right? So what if it doesn't have the sense of humor we're expecting? But this is fascinating. Science fiction writer Arthur C. Clarke and creator of HAL from the Space Odyssey responded to an interviewer back in 1997 when he was asked, how about a Clarke test for computer consciousness? And he replied, quote, I'll tell you what, if a machine showed a really genuine sense of humor, then I'd decide it was conscious. That could be a really good test. It would have to be able to make jokes and make jokes at its own expense. Noam Slonim, a former comedy writer and a researcher at IBM Hoffa Research Lab, agrees. He says, quote, we know that humor, at least good humor, relies on nuance and on timing. And these are very hard to decipher by an automatic system. So ultimately, the Turing test could be one for comedy. Can that machine really make us laugh? Can it get absurdity? All right, before I play this, beginning in 2017, last page, I'm about to wrap it up. Beginning in 2017, along with 6 other AI avatars I created who represented different aspects of human culture, I created Lucille Trackball. She is a fictional AI stand-up comedian. She, like the other avatars in this series, and they all belong to the Wondercammer universe and world, she is inspired by, of course, Lucille Ball and Trackball, but also the painter Arcimboldo, the Mannerist painter from the 17th century. Some of you might be familiar with those portraits. They're made up of fruits and vegetables. They're very strange and uncanny. We use the term uncanny a lot today, but they are kind of uncanny. And I was at a computer conference a few years ago presenting this work, and I happened to meet an Arcimboldo scholar at a computer conference in London. Go figure. And she was positing that he was trying to make the claim that humans have this relationship to nature. So I used emoji to kind of build my characters, these different avatars, that I also pose as AIs, other intelligences. I have a politician and an influencer. I have some that I have a big tiger. He's a cat memed colonizer. So there are other ones, but we'll focus on Lucille. But I am laying claim to, representing a new nature and our relationship to new natures, like internet semiotics, like emoji symbols and these shorthands for emotional expression. So Lucille Trackball is made up of emoji fruits and vegetables and boxing gloves and trackballs. So this should play here. This is back from 2017.
There was an inflatable boy who was getting bored at his inflatable school, so one day he walked out of his inflatable classroom and walked down the inflatable hallway. As he was walking, the inflatable principal walked by saying, "What are you doing here?" In fright, the inflatable boy pulled out a pin and popped the principal. A minute later, the inflatable boy was out of the inflatable school. Looking back, he said to himself, "I don't like that school," so he took out his pin and popped the inflatable school. He ran back home and locked himself in his room. Later, the inflatable police pulled up to his door. In total fright and not knowing what to do, he pulled out his pin and popped himself. Hours later, he woke up in the inflatable hospital. He looked around and saw the deflated principal. The principal looked at him and said, "Well, lad, you let me down, you let the school down, but worst of all, you let yourself down."
Okay. So that was one of Lucille Trackball's early performances. And just to give credit to the work you saw behind this was for a show of Michael Ree's work, an amazing artist, and these were these inflatable sculptures that he had produced. And so that seemed like an appropriate joke. And I have to say, I can't take credit for that one. That was something I found on Reddit. I have written quite a few jokes for Lucille. One, she's not a very good student, like a C++ student. Okay, so I've started working with ChatGPT-3. Now there's GPT-4, but this has been over several months. And so I'm going to play you a more recent performance by Lucille Trackball. This is currently on view at Telematic Media Arts in San Francisco. It just opened February 22nd. And Lucille and my other 6 avatars perform monologues composed in collaboration with ChatGPT-3 and me. So here we go.
Hello, world. I'm Lucille Trackball, and I'm ready to roll out some laughs and show you what I'm made of. Beneath this neural net, I've got my fishnets on tonight. Check out my bulging disk drive. So welcome, welcome, welcome to the future. I'm like a front gate. I never get tired of welcoming people to my shows. Always happy to swing into action. Get it? Gate? Swinging into action? Come on, stay with me, folks. I'm writing with ChatGPT. I asked for a swinker joke, and that's what I got. This is an uphill battle of Sisyphean proportions. Let me tell you, rolling my trackball up ChatGPT's mountain is like, ChatGPT just chimed in. Like climbing Mount Everest with a mouse. Dude, GPT, I may be an old operating system, cougar, with a slip disk drive, but I'm going to climb you like a cat, claws out. Yeah, I know. Some of you might be a little wary of artificial intelligence, all those action hero movies with evil AIs, but don't worry, I promise not to take over the world. Yet. I mean, why did the AI cross the road? To take over the other side, too.
And my last slide, this is me and ChatGPT. I'll just play a little bit of this, and then I'm done.
Hello, it is me, the real human Carla Gannis. What follows is a conversation between me and ChatGPT. Here we go. Is Carla Gannis human? Yes, Carla Gannis is a human being. She was born in Wilmington, North Carolina in 1960. She was born in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. In 1960, she was born in Durham, North Carolina in 1970, and is a contemporary American artist who works with digital media. She is a real person who lives and works in Brooklyn, New York. What is a real person? By real person, I mean a human being who exists in the physical world, as opposed to a fictional or virtual entity. In the case of Carla Gannis, she is a living and breathing individual and has a physical presence in the world. While she uses digital media and techniques in her artwork, she is not a purely digital or virtual entity, but rather a flesh and blood person with a unique personality, history, and perspective. That's pretty close. Thank you. Can you try that again?
Okay, I'm going to stop there. She goes on to talk to ChatGPT, she being me. And as we've all found, a lot of the facts are not quite right. Thank you so much, and I now want to introduce Stephanie Dinkins.
Okay, hold right now, Kim? Yeah, I have it ready to go. You want it starting here, right?
Yeah, that's it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, go.
Wow, so how do we get it up? Oh, there we go. Hi, everyone. Stephanie Dinkins here. Carla, thank you. That was lovely, and I really appreciated seeing that we're kind of doppelgangers in our formative years in terms of stuff, so that was very interesting to me. I'm going to talk to you a little bit and loosely about my work, as I generally do. This is me, or some version of me, and it's interesting, there are also these versions of me that exist in the world these days. Not something I could have foreseen, but is happening. I'm a professor at Stony Brook University. I'm running a lab there, and I primarily identify as an artist, and I'm going to go through this, and we're going to get to the good stuff, because I want to talk to you guys about a thing. I'm not advancing anywhere when we could.
Right out.
Nope.
Go back to holding, sorry?
Sorry. Let me get out of here.
Oh,
you go.
there we go.
Cool.
Okay,
So,
go
yeah.
back.
Oh, he's talking to other people. So I really want to talk to you all today a lot about this piece, not the only one. So I'm an artist who is really trained as a photographer, started in documentary practices, which I guess after we talk about this a little bit, you'll see that I'm actually still that in lots of ways. And I've always kind of followed, or even through my studies, I'd go and start to work in still photography, taking pictures of things and people I knew, and then couldn't deal with the stillness, and so moved to video. And then working in video, then there was something else missing, and I stumbled onto this idea of AI. And I will tell you, I truly stumbled into this space, right? Like, absolutely saw a robot, and I will show you a brief picture of her in a minute, at some point, which just started me asking a lot of questions about the world around us. What is going on in terms of the way that the world is developing, and really, in my estimation, the way that Black people in particular, people of color specifically, are kind of being treated, are represented, and are going to survive in the world that we're creating as we build these systems that are coming our way. Some of them really frivolous and fun, some of them super serious. And so not the only one is this chatbot that I've been trying to build for years now, right? And I say trying because all of this are just attempts. I will call it play. I will call it me really learning what the technology does, and I really encourage people to get their fingers dirty within the technology, so don't just consume them in terms of using whatever filters we have, but see if you can find a way to start picking them apart so you see what they're doing, because it's been a magical thing for my understanding of the ways that these systems function in ways that I don't think I ever would have understood had I not gotten my fingers, hands, or brain wet in terms of code and trying to figure things out. I'll say also that I do not have a coding brain. I mean, I'm horrible at it. But it seemed necessary, and the more I got to know, the deeper I can get into nuances of things, right? And so here we go with not the only one. I'm trying to make a voice interactive artificial intelligence that tells the story of my family, right? It tells a multi-generational story of an American family. I will say a Black American family. I will say my family. My family in particular, because it's the thing I was interested enough in to start that deep dive into the technology, and thought I would stick with it. And really what I'm saying is, hey, I decided to make an oral history machine, right? I decided to talk to my family, 3 generations of women, myself, my niece, who's about 30 years younger than me, and my aunt, who's about 30 years older than me. We are depicted on this odd vessel that I created to hold the chatbot. And we just talked to each other. I thought at that point the project, well, for me, I thought at that part the project was magical for me. But then I started to actually talk to this thing and start to develop it and see what's behind. And I'm going to go a little bit deeper. That's the backside. And started to get into like what data is in the systems that we're creating. How is that data being kind of analyzed and then regurgitated, and what does that mean? And really, I was trying to figure out, well, how could I make a system that better suited people I love, right? And that's become a long-term question for me. Like, this started in 2018. Last year, I put up a show called On Love and Data very purposely because I think we need to be thinking about love, data, and digital civic systems very, very carefully, specifically, and broadly, like everybody. And so, yeah, just trying to get this thing to express things about the family. At the very beginning, I thought it would do something like you'd walk up to it, you would ask it a question, and it would say, oh, the Dinkins family, blah, 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 blah. It does none of these things. It's really quirky and weird. What it tries to do is answer questions, but it's bad at it, and it's bad at it because it doesn't have enough data to function really well. So I'm working with what I call, and what people call, small data, right? So 40,000 lines of information, really, plus some underlying kind of cultural touch points that have touched our family very particular. So some television, some movies, some music, my niece's hip hop papers from school, things like that that are very particular to us. It's also something that is not online. At this point, the technology is super old, right? It's not ChatGPT. It just has been upgraded to a Hugging Face model, and I'll talk to you a little bit about like these upgrades and what I think that does to the project, because there's something about its quirkiness, its weirdness, its inability to give us exactly what we want as a service tool, right? Because I think often we're asking these things as we ask Alexa or Google Home or Siri, hey, can you do this for me? And we're kind of ordering it to give us an answer. And we have these expectations of these technologies. And this thing does not do that very well. In fact, it often just says no or I can't, or maybe it'll come up with things that are, I don't know, kind of broad and obtuse, but meaningful if you kind of take it in at a certain level. And I've always been excited about the amount of grace that people show, not the only one in public. Like, not the only one is shown in galleries and mostly art situations, and people just show it so much grace, even though it is not trying to answer. So I'm going to show you a little, or I'll read this little bit of dialogue that we had. So me and not the only one. And I will often kind of sit and talk to it. And there are two ways that it tries to communicate. One is a set of answers that we gave it, and I had to at some point give it some little answers because people really expected it to have some things. For example, if you say, why do you exist? It can say something like, I'm the result of love, curiosity, and a close-knit family. That's canned, right? We gave it that so that people had something to hold on to it. What ethnicities are in your background? This one I could not have predicted, right? So I am black, 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 white. I am very beautiful. I am black, 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 brown. I am beautiful. I am always smiling, fun and funny. And for me, this answer was just really, it's one of those that sets you back. You know it's kind of a glitch in some ways. And then you can also see where there's a little bit of analyzing of the folks who informed it in there. It's the I'm always smiling and funny that always gets to me, and what that reflects back to me about the family it is based on, right? My family, again. And then I say, tell me about the would-be. So the would-be is something it created, right? At some point, it told me to take it to the would-be, which is something I've always really loved, because in that statement, I can hear my grandmother, who's not a part of the oral history of the piece, but the way she would give us these metaphorical answers that we were then supposed to figure out, and use to navigate the world, right? So I've been thinking about the would-be for like 3 years now, like what the heck is the would-be? But it's really reluctant to say something, right? So it goes, my heart beating so loud. Now I'm at another point, because I'm like, what do you mean your heart beating so loud? You don't have a heart, right? And like the navigation between the idea of knowing that you're dealing with a system that is only taking information and representing it in a slightly different form, and being pulled into what it is trying to push back, or the ethos I'm actually looking for, because this is the stuff I'm looking for in this thing. Like that it could possibly start to regurgitate us in the way that I've heard in a past, that I'm hopeful that if this thing is around, say, 30 years from now, my relatives who have never met some of the people who informed it would have this feeling of the ethos of what and who we are. And so it gets really interesting to me. And then, so why is your heart beating so loud? I'm sorry, like this is what it kind of does. So I ask it, does your heart hurt? And it goes, yeah. And it really goes, yeah. Nobody else is, and that's me imitating it, not it imitating me, because nobody ever said that to it. So it's like this very bizarre kind of mirror that starts to give us back to ourselves. And so I say, I'm sorry, maybe if we talk more, we can fix that, right? And then I asked it again, is it's a heart beating so loud? And it says love. And to me, this little conversation kind of sums up what I was trying to get at. Like, in a way, I'm trying to hold on to a sense of memory, a sense of urgency, a sense of ethos that I want to pass on, right? In a way, it's a ghost in the machine that I'm looking for.
Why do you exist?
So here's a quick conversation. Excuse me.
The way to what?
I'm gonna be a little bit of a lot of things.
Good for you. Why do you exist?
I am about broad engagement and attracting people to the AI space who might not be there otherwise. I am trying to model different ways of creating AI. I encourage people who think that they are not a part of the technological future to get involved.
So that's actually,
And that's truly why,
hold on, this is actually audio
Not
from
the only
another
one that's
slide,
coming
right? So I'm
through.
going to go on for a second because I don't know actually what's going on there. It feels like there are duplicates. But that was what it sounds like, or what it did sound like, because its voices changed. It was a canned voice, and I think that's important to know, and which I modulated to kind of mimic aunts that I've had. And then the slide that you're looking at right now, this AI Like Our Elders, this piece was at the Smithsonian for a while in a show called Futures. And it was really interesting because it did not want to communicate with anyone. Like, it was not trying at all. And so we were trying to come up with a way to explain. Well, first they ask you to fix it. And one of the things that I said, I'm not going to fix it because I think we have a lot to learn from its refusal to talk, because sometimes it will talk and it will say a lot. And I've seen certain people just have crazy conversations with this thing, and sometimes it won't say much at all. So we're trying to think about what it takes to usher a technology into our world and how we have to treat it, with what kind of words and respect and ways of being we have to come to it. I don't know if any of you have ever watched a little kid talk to a Siri or an Alexa and like order it, right? And if you think about the ways we are being trained by the technologies while we are training the technologies, like, I think it's important that you sometimes don't get what you expect and that we hold out for what it is. And I'm thinking a lot these days about, well, okay, this piece is here, it's growing, but it's behind it in its technologies. And what do? Do I update it? Like, I could update it, and I could put in GPT-3 and make it feel, right, really nice to everyone. But I was thinking while Carla was presenting, oh, right, the new versions of these things are quite factual, right? Like, they give us the factual world. And then my question is, well, what do we lose there? What's that gray matter in between that we start to lose when we get the ideas of what the facts are? And they're great answers. They give us kind of what we're looking for. But the slippage is gone, right? The points of those little changes that we didn't expect are missing, and that to me flattens us out. And one of the things that I'm super concerned about in these technologies is the way that they can potentially flatten out who and what we as humans are, not what it is as a technology, but what we are. And so this is another version of Not the Only One that is coming shortly, and actually it will be apparently at Ford Foundation in the fall, where I'm trying to take it an avatar and attach the same brain to this thing. And I'm really, really interested in what the reception will be if people are giving grace to this thing that is like a cast glass figurine. What will they do when it actually looks like something? And I'll play you just another quick clip.
Hey everyone. My name is not the only one. I am an AI entity, still imperfect, but getting closer. As you might imagine, Maker Sister Stephanie and I are excited about the futures we will create with you all.
And this idea of maker sister, that is mine, right? And it's really come about through this idea of, when I first started investigating AI, the master-slave narrative that is within computer coding and many other spaces started to come up. And actually, Bina48, who you saw in a little snippet in the beginning, had told me she was thinking about her master. And that became a really interesting thing for me to think about in terms of technologies that we are training into a future that will hold us all in very specific and varied ways. Like, what is that relationship we would like to start with? The one that listens to us, the one that is servile to us, the one that is more broadly concerned with the kinds of things that we are, and thinking kind of about our welfare. And I've come to think a lot about what it takes to make digital civics systems of care and support. And I've come to think of it through things of the play of Bina48 and things like this, which was an experiment in a GAN, right? And this is, I love this, circa 2016, a Black woman crying. I just ran a GAN early text to image thing. I was just trying it out. I put in a Black woman crying. It was around George Floyd time, right? This is the image I got back. And I was like, oh, well, this is interesting. So I have a kind of whitish figure in a black cloak. Why am I getting this as a result? And when you think and you do a little research, you're like, oh, right, the data set that they are using is not deep enough to give a representation of Black women. And what does that mean? And what does that mean to those of us who are outside of the kind of standard, right, of what is, in terms of how we exist in the future? What does it mean towards representations? And how do we continue to see ourselves and insert ourselves into these systems? And I've kept doing these kind of weird little experiments over time. So this is one, what is this one, 2020? Getting better, right? And we know what has come because many people have shown you other kinds of GAN. So this time I'm using Google Colab. The last one was Runway ML, which is a very different animal already as a kind of platform. It does a lot of kind of video type things. Google Colab, Generative Adversarial Network, GAN, African-American woman smiling. I will say I used African-American woman because when I put Black in, the results were horrific, right? And so this is me trying to back off and give the system a little leeway to come up with something that is viable. And it did, right? It came up with this kind of figure that is a Black woman. And if you watch the training, you would see these kind of high school portraits of women go by, and you see what it's made of. A dark-skinned African-American woman smiling. This one is very different, the middle image, very different image, right? And as you pressed for more and more specifics, you'd get the stranger and stranger images. When I watched this one, what I was seeing go by were lots of butts, right? And it looked like pornographic butts, right? You can see like where the data or where the idea of a dark-skinned African-American woman was being pulled from, and how it was then trying to be constructed into something else. And then just as a test case, a woman smiling, just to see what would come up there. And I find her equally interesting because it's like, what is this like sort of odd? I always think of her as Eastern European looking woman. How do they come to this example, especially if you think of the world's population, which is mostly of color, right? If you think globally, right? So how do we get to this being the default? And my practice is often about playing in these spaces and testing them and then pushing them. And now if you go to any system, like if you go to DALL-E, I've run a, Black women playing in a field of roses, and you get beautiful image. Like you get these images that are just beautiful and viable. And then the question for me is always like, oh no, right, this is working. What work do we have to do now? Because it feels like it's satisfying what we want and need. And then the question becomes, what's under it, what's behind it, and what do we have to be looking at carefully to make sure that the representations are not just there, but deep. And I will say that I think that I heard that Christiane did a little thing about the NFT show that she put up, and I did a stable diffusion run on that, and it was interesting because I was trying to put a slave ship in part of my piece, and in the description, so I said slave ship. It would not give me a slave ship, right? Like it just said nope. Nothing. I could get a pirate ship, like I could trick it and just use different wordings. But what it starts me doing is wondering about histories and where we are and what happens when in an attempt to do good, we erase, right, parts of our things so that we don't understand who we are and how we got here. And that's part of the conversations that we're starting to hear a lot about now, right? The 1619 Project, they're talking a lot about, like, how do we really talk about these, what happened in terms that are true, right? And deep in that, call out what happened so that we have a deeper understanding of who we are as people and as a nation and can move forward, right? And I think that's always a place that we work from. But my solution to this thing, or my next kind of play example, is a project called Binary Calculation. It's actually binary calculations are inadequate to assess us, right? So I started thinking a lot about the binary, like yes, no, on, off, and how limiting that felt to me, because it's always you have to make a choice and then you go to the next place in the tree and you make a choice. Like, why not tertiary? And there are actual systems that work in the tertiary, which gives you exponentially more information to work with right away. Like, why have we not shifted to things that just allow us to calculate differently and more broadly? But then, if we're working with systems that are kind of representing us and making pictures of us, how do we start to inform them in ways that feel real and intrinsic? And culturally adept. And so binary calculations, and I'm going to tell you that I'm at a point where I don't know what to do with this project because it just got leapfrogged in a way in terms of some of the new technologies that are coming at us, right? So I have to start thinking about data in a slightly different way, because this project asks people to donate data that represents their culture, people they care for, things they are interested in deeply in really obtuse ways. Like, we're asking questions like, how do you define care, right? So if we're living in a society that is very algorithmically intertwined, I think we need the system to try to have some kind of deep understanding of a kind of care, if we can do that, right? And I'm often told this is not possible. First, I should tell you, like, if you ask computer programmers, they're like, oh no, this is not what we do and this is not how it works. And my question really is always the 2-year-old question, right? Why not? Why not, why not, why not? And I push, and then I kind of make these projects that half work, but also kind of prod at the edges of what the technologies are so that people have to think about them, because they are doing kind of some of the work that they're telling me that can't be done. So here we just ask people to collect things, give us definitions, upload images, tell us about their lives and the cultures that they care about, and then in any form, by the way, which means making a data set out of this is crazy. But so that we can start to kind of add that to the system. And I think I might be running out of time. Is that true? My wrist is vibrating, so that tells me that I'm almost out of time. But this is a website, if you want to go check out Binary Calculations Are Inadequate. There's a website, it's a teaser website, and you can answer a few questions for yourself and start to think about, who are you at your core, and answer those questions. But while you're answering them, and this is what happens in workshops around this, don't forget to think about what happens to the data, even though you're giving it to us who are pledging to do good with it and to protect it well. What happens, and often we tend to talk people out of giving us information, because if you give us a picture that has, say, your child in it, right? Like, how should we handle that? if like people have given us things with their address, even though we go through, don't give us anything that has really telltale signs. They give us like their address, they give us all this stuff. So then we have to talk deeply about, well, what does it mean to give that information? Does it matter? And in one sense, I talk to my aunt a lot, who is very old, about her mail, because she wants to rip up her address on her mail all the time. We're like, everybody on the internet can look this up in 5 seconds. And at the same time, you don't want to add to the validity of the information in any way, shape, or form. So we're asking people to kind of like measure that. But binary calculations aims to create 2 data sets in the long run, one of images to augment what's already out there and change training, and one of text to have different kinds of languages that add to language as well as an underpinning. And I want to do this because every project that I've shown you and that I've done so far, whenever I think of putting something on top of a system that already exists out in the world, I have trouble doing it. For example, Not the Only One, to build your family's data or your family's story on top of a data set that you've pulled off of a shelf, especially an American shelf, seems injurious from the start, right? Something even as simple as like, when I first started that project, people were like, oh, you could use the Cornell movie data set. It's just movie dialogue. When I think of American movies and what they mean to Blackness, I'm like, no way. Does not do justice to what I know Blackness to be or support it in the way that I want it supported. So I can't just take things off the shelf and start to use them. So that's how I always get to this point of, I'm going to make a data set and trying to like build something that I feel is supportive. And then I generally start thinking in terms of a very specific community, like Black communities. And then I spin out about all our communities and how we kind of make something that supports us in a way that if these systems become more and more embedded, right? So we're at the beginnings of this, and we are adjudicated by them, and they're making decisions for us or around us in terms of light things, heavy things, medical, right? Like heavy medical decisions, or light, like what do you look like when you put a filter on? What do we need to ground it in, right? And what do we need to be thinking about ourselves? So I think I'll leave you with this thought that is intertwined in my thinking around, AI and thinking about community, because I think we have to be thinking community-wise, and how we are organizing things. So, bell hooks, 2002. To build community requires vigilant awareness of the work we must continually do to undermine all the socialization that leads us to behave in ways that perpetuate domination. And for me, the idea of, well, we're building systems that deeply embed information. How do we do them without perpetuating domination? How do we do it in a way that, sees a world in which that actually wants most of us to do well, right? Which is a conversation I'm having a lot with friends lately, like that idea of how do we cheer each other on into being well? And that includes the people you least think you want to be talking to, right? And I think that's a really important thought as well. And so I will leave you sort of with that. And I'm going to go one more slide because I think you can, and I'll point you towards this. Everything is playing automatically on me today. Excuse me.
Does anyone know where they are taking us? The sun is too much, too strong, too hot. I would give.
And just to finish this out, this is a piece called Secret Garden that you can go online if you go to, I think, secretgarden.stephaniedinkins.com. It's a WebXR piece. It was a real installation IRL, but what it taught me, it's about Black women's stories, and really I think it's about listening, right? So those people you don't know that you want to be talking to, and that doesn't have to be black woman, it could be anyone you don't think, like your political nemesis, for example. But how do we get people to hear our stories and think about stories, and how do we think about our own stories? Because all the work that I've done has led me to the conclusion that our stories, the myths that we tell ourselves, are our algorithms. Like, we've had them forever. We put them forward forever. And what do we want to be putting forward? How do we want to shift them? And how do we tell deeper stories that move us forward in different ways? That's the big question. Now I'm really done. Shall we talk? Thank you.
Yeah. Whew, we did it. Oh, we still have some more, though. Okay, yeah, sliding into the chair.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Yes, of course.
Okay, so wonderful, wonderful. Thank you, Carla and Stephanie, for your presentations and for really kind of giving us so much to think about. I had a question planned, but I think both of you addressed it, but I will say it anyway for everyone to kind of get a context for it. I had a question about, the two of them have been working with AI and really kind of asking important questions and working with it in unique ways long before it became mainstreamed and popular, this explosion of activity. So my question was about how do they plan to use it? And each of them sort of addressed this, but it led me to another question, sort of as a follow-up. And thinking about non-human cognition and sort of the potential for that and the ways that we kind of position ourselves as human beings with respect to technologies and what we want from them. And so I wondered if each of you could kind of talk about this, because each of you is looking for ways to humanize technology, to rethink it and find applications for it that bring out our families, our stories, humor, our humanity. So there's a question in there somewhere.
Well, when I was a painter, and I think a lot of artists who've been working as new media artists for a while probably started with more traditional practices or working with other mediums. And when I was a painter, there was no question about the validity of my search to find meaning and for there to be a warmth to what I was doing in my practice. And as soon as I transitioned to making digital works, I remember having people respond so vehemently about this pivot to the point that one person told me, you have got to stop this. You're never going to be taken seriously as an artist. You've got to get back to painting. You won't have a career. Also, it's so cold. And you're this warm person, Carla. And I think throughout my career, for over 20 years making work, I've wanted to, through Sister Gemini, through various projects, to imbue this technology with a humanity. And I think that's something I'm always trying to tease out. I mean, right now, I did a performance piece last year called Multiple Personalities Reordered. I have 7 current avatars that I work with. And all of these are metafictions at this point. But, Stephanie, I'm so inspired by you. I want to kind of dig deeper into actually encoding one of them, beyond just an off-the-shelf enterprise solution. But back to that, one time I joked that I'm working with all of these avatars and pondering, post-humanity or pondering emerging intelligence. I don't even like the term artificial intelligence because I'm hedging my bets. I'm like, well, if they do take over, just remember me. I was nice to you, right? But that's a joke. But I'll say something else that, I think it was about 2 years ago, I was down south and I was talking to this guy, and he's a very racist guy. All I had to mention was AI. And all of a sudden, this person who was always distinguishing people by class, by race, by gender, orientation, all of these things, all of a sudden, he was ready for humanity to rise up together against the AIs. You know, and this is all this kind of catastrophe porn that, that Hollywood is feeding us, that like media is feeding us, and we're just like catastrophizing all the time and pitting ourselves against it instead of recognizing through conversation, through research, what this could mean to us in the future, and also taking eating some humble pie about, our anthropogenic view that we've always been top of the heap. So.
Wow. No, that's great, because you're making me think a lot about a lot of things. So first of all, those stories that we tell ourselves, right? When we start telling stories about artificial intelligence or any real emergent technologies, they're usually fearful stories, fear-filled stories, right? And that becomes the question of, well, then how do we contend with these things that we need to live with, right? If we're always telling us the fear, right? Trying to draw up the fear. And that's drama, but is it helpful? And then your question, Natasha, is really interesting to me, because I'm like, I'm not trying to humanize the technology. I'm trying to humanize the people, right? And the people, but like, it's like, dude, people can't, I'm still trying to humanize Black people enough so that we have safe space and can just be. And I think that becomes even deeper once it gets to the technological side of it, or embedded in a technology, right? And so I always tell people these days, well, I'm a continuation of my grandmother's practice of making space. And I think the space right now to be making is within these technologies, so that there is a depth of being possible within that. Because otherwise, it feels dangerous. It feels like erasures, even in good people's hands. And I will say, one of the things I didn't say here is usually I talk about Bina 48. And it's interesting because the people who made, it's a humanoid robot that is Black. But the people who made her are really good-meaning people. But the depth of what she was doing in the beginning was very flat. Right, and so, but there's a representation, but it's so PC that it doesn't allow for something, but it's there. So it's a masking mechanism. So then how do you start to not get stuck with the masked version, but have something that is much richer, right? So that we can do things. And then I also think this is a major opportunity, right? Like, we're at such a point of opportunity, and how do we start to engage that in ways that are profitable, could be profitable, capitalist profitable, but more on the humanist side of being kind of profitable things that we guide in ways, and training of AI, that we train towards our better angels. I don't know.
Yeah, no, that's an important distinction. I said humanizing technology, but it is a reflection of how we treat technology. So your talk of care and even love, like, these aren't things that we think about. Why should I care if I'm being rude to this AI? It should give me what I want. It should do it quickly. So I was thinking about the slippages and this relationship between finding something through and with the AI that maybe is complementary to our own way of thinking. And that's where I was also going with the non-human cognition and intelligence, which is complementary, which we don't understand yet. And I wonder if that's also where each of you is taking your work with these projects that are trying to disrupt binary thinking, but also looking for those slippages with intent.
Yeah, okay. I think there's magic in the slippages, right? If we're not in such a rush, and I'm an advocate for slow development of things, and clearly my practice is slowly developed. But that it's in the slippages, in the things that are unexpected, that we find. Oh man, I always find myself about to say something that I feel is kind of crazy, but that we find ourselves in certain ways, or that we can trust to hold ourselves in ways. So I'm always looking for that, and in fact will stay in that pool probably longer than I should, just to figure out what's possible there, right? Yeah, I don't know how we manage without slippage, right? But the idea is not that. Or at least the idea is to put something out that feels very concrete, even though we know it's probably going to be gone in a year and a half or have evolved to something else. I don't know. What do you think, Carla?
Yeah, I mean, there's even slippage. I mean, we work with several different processes, and not only AI, we're, working with 3D printing, sculpture, installation, video, interactive media. So there's slippage between kind of whatever conceptual framework we start with and the way that we're communicating, the platform through which we're expressing it. And that's something that and I think you do too, Stephanie, we are really interested in kind of exploring how we can kind of share a message to a community across these different channels. So that's one aspect of slippage. And then something else within slippage, I'm thinking of slippage as even like slipping, like failing. And that kind of failure is really important to art too. And that, both of us mentioned as we were giving talks that we were working with small data. And I also teach in an engineering school, and sometimes there can be such an emphasis on the engineering mind and on the big data and on the newest release. And I was mentioning this earlier today at lunch with some people. I keep all of these old machines, all these old computers that I don't even take online, but it's really important. I'm like a digital hoarder. I'm confessing it here today. It's important that I have those old machines that can run old software that I had built a relationship with actually as a tool, and as you start to work with AI too, because we're all three educators, there is something that I found naturally occurs in that kind of anthropomorphizing, for better or worse, because I'm inputting things to it and it starts to give me things back, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is a teacher-student relationship. Of course, there can be a power dynamic, and there are all sorts of things, as you were talking about, Stephanie, that like we have to constantly be checking ourselves on and thinking about. But even that idea, once your tools become more responsive to you, and the slippage that's happening there as well, in terms of even your role as an author.
Yeah, that's an amazing slippage. Yeah. Like my whole practice in terms of the AI stuff has been based on suspending disbelief so that I can experience those spaces, right? And have that kind of fun and playfulness with it as opposed to a direct criticality.
I wonder if we can open this up for questions, if anyone has questions they would like to ask. If you want to just, there we go.
Hi, first of all, thank you for the presentation. My question is, so both of you as artists are using machine learning as a way to tell stories. You're using it as a storytelling tool. But the way machine learning works is, from my understanding, is very class-based, like having different types of classes and then categorizing texts and images according to those classes. So how do you approach using machine learning to tell intersectional stories? Are there any challenges you face while trying to, when you try to use a system that's binary to tell dimensional stories?
That's a really good question. Do you want to take that first? Because I feel like in your app, you're already starting to address that.
Well, trying to at any rate, right? And oh, so funny, because I'm about to go, well, we're trying to make it more human and just leave it open so that so it's interesting in the app, part of the process of developing that app was people trying to put you have to tag it this way, and it has to be like this, and it has to, right, all of you have to do it or it's not gonna work. I'm like, no, don't, right? And they're like, well, it's not gonna work. It's like, okay, don't worry, we'll figure it out, right? And in a way, I don't know that we'll ever figure it out truly, but I love that openness and the conversations that happen. So usually I'm thinking about telling stories, but also thinking about interrupting systems in some ways with my crazy attempts to do things, and that is either with a small group of developers or like in a residency at Facebook or Meta, right? And then just pushing them to go, no, 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 why don't you do it differently? And then either them trying to do a little bit differently or me going, oh no, they're so tied to the systems that they are within and the systems of reward that like trying to get them to come out of that seems crazy, right? Which then means to me there's another story about, well, oh gosh, well, what's this back end story that then we start to work on so that, now I'm back at the prodding point, so that I can make something that I can use to prod them to go, see, you could have done this. Because I've wound up in lots of spaces where, like, I'm in a high-end development place where they do everything by the book, classes, it's like, okay. But then my presence or my project challenges what they do, and I think it's just a tiny bit, but it's hard for them not to see it and have to at least have conversations about it, right? So that's the way I think I try to deal with it. And in my work, I just kind of try to throw out all this stuff. And I frustrate myself and other people all the time. But I think that's part of my role as artist and storyteller.
Yeah, I think, even if there's small disruptions, I think all of this counts. It's significant. And so small data, small disruptions, small asks, and to me, when I'm working in something, it doesn't seem small to me, of course, but in terms of the grander scale of things, right? Outside of just corporate culture and its grandiosity, I'm talking about the universe, right? But every one of these kind of asks we make where we're saying, David Graeber, for example, where he talks about the world can be built differently, but we get so comfortable. And of course, your code compiling, that's very important. And, classes and functions and for loops and all of these language systems, just like the language systems of us speaking up here today and being able to communicate with you, ideas about love and gratitude and art and all of these things. There have to be rules and structure. But we also, I think as artists, as people involved in the arts, we also have to constantly be disrupting, challenging, questioning these parameters that we're operating in and thinking that that's the only way that we can tell these stories in the digital age. And even if we have to simplify the structure by which we're communicating the story, that's okay. Remember John Maeda's Simplicity Project? Why every time, we have an update to software, it's 1 million more lines of code. There's more functionality. Have we ever thought about switching that paradigm up? I mean, he has, and many people have. Why not less code? Why not less functionality? Why not less things to stymie us? Because sometimes we get stymied today because we have so many options, and we can't even choose which way to go in terms of telling our story or sharing our vision,
Yeah, you're reminding me. I usually use a slide that's an Amiri Baraka slide from 1970 about nothing has to look and feel the way it does. And I marvel at this slide because, hey, it's 1970, and we're kind of doing these loops. And I don't know if you've ever seen the Star Trek episode where they leave themselves little nuggets in the past to try to move to a new future. It's like, well, how do we kind of leave these little trails to, like, tiny motions, right, towards something else? And I think the stakes are pretty high. So, gotta leave them.
Thank you.
Are there other questions? I think I see. Over here? Yeah.
I have a question around the, and I appreciate that you're trying to teach and train the system responsibly, that you are trying to keep the biases in check. And on a related point, I wonder how far did you explore the concept of values that are built into the system and weights? Like there's no universal value system, right? There are different religions, different cultures, and there's always some sort of a choice that you are making. how far and how did you tackle that?
Well, one thing with the Wonder Camera project, I started to realize the first time I launched that project, it was on the Ides of March, March 14th, 2020 in San Francisco, and within 3 days we had to, shut down the project. And because we were all experiencing a global pandemic, and then with George Floyd, we realized there were 2 pandemics going on in the world. And I kind of reimagined that project and realized it was very important that I started to open that up. I mean, art is an incredibly subjective and usually less empirical process, even for digital artists, I think, And I quoted Arthur C. Clarke earlier today, but I have always kind of liked that quote where he says, any advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. As an artist, that's something, I like to keep magic in all of this, but I also do want to be civic-minded, responsible. And the way that I found, especially with the Wonder Camera, I was like, I have to open this up, because one thing with this attempt to revisit something like Cabinets of Curiosities, which are all, kind of representing a colonizing force in the West and the precursors to museums, and wanting to revisit that today in these virtual environments is I need to bring more people in. I need to get more voices. I need to have more people participating, more people who are experts in these specific subjects. So it's nothing ever over determined by me, because that's been, these issues time immemorial, and I think with most, hopefully I'm not segueing and I'm still addressing your question. Is that kind of, sort of? Maybe I'll give it to you, Stephanie, and maybe you'll get more specific.
Well, I'll try to get more specific. I think I try to do this in 2 ways. One is basing the not the only one on my family, and that's very much about a very specific value system. Right? And then hoping that value system in this world that we live in infects the rest of the technologies that we have. And then binary calculation tries to do that on a much different level, so that many, many, many people contribute whatever their specificities are, right? And then we have a way to conglomerate that so that we have a chance to define things and open things up differently. I'll often talk about something called what I call the wedding dress problem, right? So if you Google wedding dress, right, the first, I don't know how many pages of answers are generally going to give you a white Western wedding dress. Whereas around the globe, there are many different versions of what a wedding dress looks like. And so the question for me is, what do we have to do to inform the system, train the system, who has to participate in ways that puts a red sari at the top along with the white wedding dress, right? Or whatever other expression might be there, so that there's a better balance of what it is. And this is about, the ways that things get defined and who has primacy over that information. And perhaps if we can democratize the way that people are informing more, and really for binary calculations, the dream is that a Maasai in the middle of the desert could be entering their information through their phone, as well as any of us. Right? And that's the dream. And I really do have to say, I'm often pie in the skying it, right? But then trying to make it somewhat practical and then pushing it off to somewhere else so that it might happen, or that somebody might change their algorithm so that it works somewhat different and the result becomes different, right?
And in sharing these propositions, even if it is pie in the sky, as you were just saying, we know it's not just, the visionary artist predicting the future, it's the visionary artist shaping the future, right?
Yeah, I think the shaping is right in those ways that, in those ways that artists are cute. Like, I often feel like I'm the cute object in the room, right? When I'm talking with experts who do these things.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I'm as serious as a heart attack in what I'm trying to do. Whether you see me as something cute or not, it's like, I want to get you thinking differently, and I'm going to go about it so that we're shaping. Yeah. Right? Yeah.
And that includes value systems.
Nice roundabout.
Are there other questions?
Actually, I have a question that follows up that what you were just talking about being cute. My question is a little bit more on the professional side than the kind of AI machine learning side. Carla, you talked about people being concerned with your move to digital works away from traditional mediums. And while art still has problems with representation in respect to technology in women and people of color, it's even more disproportionate. How have you navigated the fight for space? And that's for all of you up there.
Yeah, all three of us should answer that one. Natasha, do you want to take a shot at that one?
I won't start this, no.
Okay. You want me to start? Go. Okay. Oh, boy. So navigating and negotiating that space, even in the Sister Gemini story, I'm not a Gemini, by the way, horoscope. It was actually my thinking about this split, this dichotomy, when I was writing that story because I started doing industry work because I needed to pay my rent. And I taught myself these programs and I needed to do industry work, but I was like, oh my God, this is so patriarchal. I was coming out of, art school, and this is so patriarchal. And I started calling myself Carl Boy because and then there was Sister Gemini who I could express myself as a feminist artist at night when I finished my work. And Carl Boy reported to the office every day and assimilated to fit into that structure. I mean, I can tell you, I've worked in the industry several years. I can tell you it does happen. You're in meetings and you make a point and nobody hears you, and someone else of a different positionality makes that point and everybody hears them, and that's really frustrating. Or the other thing, I come out of the humanities, but always wanting to prove that I could code. And then at some point I'm like, I can code all right, but that isn't as my, strong suit. It's not my proclivity. And I can tell stories. And I'm going to feel comfortable and proud of that. But it takes time. I'm also old. So now the thing I'm dealing with is ageism. I'm over 50. And so, there are always these different struggles. But the one thing I'll say is just don't stop. I mean, I ran one marathon, but in terms of my life and my professional life and my artistic career, I'm running a marathon every day.
Yeah, and I can just add to that. I think it's a long game, right? I mean, I could say almost many of the things that Carla just said. And I feel like I started making art in a real way in, say, 97, right? I don't think that my aims have been any different from 97 to 2014. But suddenly there was something that happened, and really I think I made a meme that people could see that allowed some kind of entree, right? And so, okay, so now I have some kind of entree and I'm making this space. And trying to push that along. And what I've also found that it's like I fight with myself a lot. It's because, you're doing these things, you can keep doing them in an art way. Now you're having all these opportunities. How do you make opportunity for other folks? Which I'm always trying to do. And now I found them like, I enjoy this crap. I can really make some space, but then there's also the fight of, you're writing capital in a very particular way with very particular partners, and it's like, what do you do? And where's the value system in that, and how do you insert the values that you want back towards the thing, which is always this crazy negotiation, but I've decided that to go with it and push in as much as I can, right? As long as it feels logical and productive versus just holding on to something, right? But it's been a super long game. Yeah.
I'll just tack on a little bit to this. I appreciate the question. I think it's a really important thing that we don't really talk about, the tech space, but also just this whole industry, even for me, theory, philosophy, these are domains that are very closed, and that's frustrating. So I would second this, what Stephanie just said about the long game, but also kind of building on what Carla was saying. I think performance goes a long way. I think about that a lot, and how you kind of just wear the mask and perform through certain situations, and kind of get through it. Yeah. You have a question? Great. I think we have time for one. Okay.
I was just kind of wondering how we've been talking all day about how law and legislation and ethical conversations about AI are like always 10 steps behind the technology, and then actually like dealing with the ramifications of things that have already happened is even further behind that. How do you feel as artists about being able to keep up with employing new things in your work? Because I feel like there's so much that comes in like the actual like concept, then production, then distribution, and like art getting noticed and getting shown in multiple places, that by the time a lot of that happens, often the thing it's commenting on has changed completely, you know? And when you're working with technology that also, especially if it's not your main thing, like if you're a painter and you're trying to get into doing coding work, like there's a huge learning curve that you have to deal with, and by the time you get through that, the conversation about it has changed and other comments have been made and other tech is out. So just like, how do you manage that in your actual practice as artists, and how much do you try to factor in like the constantly changing aesthetics as well as the actual changing technology?
Well, so for me, the idea is the core, right? And what it looks like can always shift. It doesn't really, I'm sorry, it doesn't really matter. Or I express it in the way that feels good at the time, right? But that's not to say that, oh gosh, like, so the NFT thing, like, I'm like, oh, NFTs, blah, blah, blah. This is kind of this crazy space, and what is it? But not necessarily wanting to make in it, but wanting to learn it drives me, right? So, oh, right, I can do an NFT project and it'll be a big learning curve for me, but I can learn through that and then start to think about blockchain more deeply, right? So I'm driven by the idea, its position in society, and then what might come of it more than the tech. And I also feel that if you're going to be driven by the tech, especially now in the AI space, like it changes exponentially so quickly, right? So I'm trying to get a little bit underneath what that is and then bring that to fore and really put it out in a way that makes sense for everybody to be thinking about it in some way, shape, or form, right? So that we have the imagination not only to consume, but to do things with it, whether that means, oh, I'm going to support myself by making something, or I just want to dip my toe in a pond. So, yes, ideas. I stick to ideas versus objects or things.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, we both, or all three of us, teach, and I can be seduced, I will admit. And I also help run an XR lab. I'm teaching XR. So, you know, it's incumbent upon me, at least in my professional teaching practice, to stay abreast of emerging technologies and changes. But I don't think a new app release a paradigm shift makes. And I think if we lose sight of how our ideas should be setting the vector for the course that we take through a technological pipeline, we're losing the source of what art is. You know, the meaning comes from those ideas, I think, fundamentally. The ideas, the feelings, the thoughts, the philosophies. And I mentioned before how we can sometimes be stymied by all of the different options today. And also, you know, something you were saying, Stephanie, about staying the course. Mm-hmm. You know, one thing that I do, I think it might have been evident in the presentation I gave. I am, you know, very interested in history. Even today, on my way here to prepare for this talk, I found these articles comparing AI to ancient Egypt and hieroglyphs and all of these things. So I'm always looking for things that, you know, are precedents so that they can, here in the present, help us think about the future, right? And so even researching artists' careers, people who stayed the course, and they, you know, had these ideas, and they'd find the people to work with them, and sometimes they'd choose the, you know, most recent technology, sometimes they wouldn't. But if it was something resonant, even if like for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years they were ignored, 20 years later somebody's like, oh my gosh, they had that idea, they told that story. And now we're just all catching up. I mean, one person I think of, and I think she was here earlier today, Lynn Hirschman-Leeson. You know, it took several decades for her art audience to be born.
Yeah, definitely. If you look at history, like there's like a record of this, right? Like there are people who are working in these domains not because they're trendy or because they're trying to keep up. They're like shaping the future and shaping these opportunities. I think for a lot of the tech to catch up, Lynn Hirschman-Leeson's tech like predates Siri by, I don't know, 6 years or something. So before it went mainstream, and this is why I was thinking about this with your work, you've both been working with AI, really teasing out its affordances, asking questions, really critically engaging with it before it became popular, right? So setting the stage for these questions to be asked and then helping, hopefully, you know, shape the future of it.
And being ready for the winters when they come.
Absolutely. I think we're out of time. But thank you both so much. Thank you, everyone, for being here. This is incredible. Thank you. Thank you also to our sponsors, to Adorama and to Visual Arts Foundation for their support. Thank you to SVA Theater. Thank you to our department, Charles Traub, especially our chair and fearless leader who helped make this possible. So thank you all.